So it's nice that we're at a point to where we can actually look back on COVID, this junction in our lives. There was a season there where, Dad, we basically said every article needs to include the word COVID because that's all everyone was talking
COVID,
about.
COVID. How you doing? COVID, how you
Everything was
doing?
COVID.
COVID.
And then there was a season where none of our writers, none of our content creators, you are not allowed to talk about COVID because everyone's so sick of this and they're ready to just be back to normal. And I
Yeah.
think we're at a point now where we can just look back and go, okay, what really happened? What took place in churches? And I'm still like curious about this whole laboratory and Wuhan and all that
China.
stuff.
China. It's all China. China.
Yeah, I've
China.
got I've
China.
got some personal thoughts on that, and I'll just keep them to myself because I don't know that we'll ever really have the answers there.
Well, if you went in a certain direction, no one would remember any other part of our webinar, our podcast, because they'd be talking about that or listening to that. And they would be probably sending you messages of some note.
I don't want to be overly political on this show, particularly in things that don't pertain to the church. So I'll just keep my comments to myself. But maybe, like me, some of you have some particular thoughts. So we're
Hey,
not going to be talking about what really happened. I wish I could say we got the answer. It was a lab leak, and we can prove it. But we won't be able to do that
well,
on
let me
episode.
do a shout out that is tangentially connected, and I'll make the connection in just a moment. As of the time you're listening to this, I just got back from speaking to a group of denominational leaders. They're called AMS. I'm not going to even get into that denominational group in Florida. And most of those who were a part of that group were there. They represent a lot of churches. I don't know how many Florida churches are in the convention, Sam. So I'm not going to even speculate.
Probably
But
about 3,000 or so.
okay, so they represent a lot of churches. And what I was talking about was the future and what we can expect. They really want to know. They want to be, these are leaders that really want to be prepared for the days ahead with their churches that they serve. And so I gave a lot of future stuff. And I just started going down the list of things that we see in the future. We did a previous podcast of things we got right and wrong. It'd be interesting to go back and see what I shared with them. For example, I said one of the things that's going to really take place is the whole world of facilities and buildings is going to take a different shape. There's going to be more of reconfiguring buildings or deferred maintenance than new buildings. And I talked about Brown as an example, Brown Church Development Group, and how we use them as our partner in ministry there. And I just started going down the line, started looking at curriculum, and it was fun to look at the future. Now we're going to go back in time, and we're going to talk about the past and what we could learn from COVID. COVID's vivid to me because of churches and church answers more than anything.
Yeah, we'll get to that here in just a second, but I certainly want to thank our sponsor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got you off track. I'm sorry.
Yes, Upward Sports.
Ooh, I didn't need to get you off track there.
No, they are the world's largest Christian youth sports organization, but they do local churches so well. At this point, we know the team. Jennifer, shout out to you. You're amazing. If you call Upward and reach out to them, you're going to get people that are active in their local churches, love the local church, and want to help you do outreach and to do it through sports. So partnering with Upward Sports helps your church reach the community, attract young families. Everybody wants to do that. We get that question all the time. How do I get young families in the church? It's like, well, you can foster. That's one way.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Or you can do Upward Sports, which, takes some effort, but it works. So if you want to reach your community, share the gospel in a meaningful way, kick off 2025 with a lot of purpose, or maybe you're thinking about the summer and what you may be doing in the summer.
True.
This is an excellent way to do it. Upward Sports really does it better than anybody else. So go to upward.org/church answers. Again, upward.org/church answers.
I know they have basketball, cheerleading, soccer, flag football, baseball, volleyball, soon to be pickleball, And you recently told about another one that they're opening up with. I know we're trying to keep this just general, but
Yeah,
real brief
running.
word.
Running is now something that they do. You can go to upwardrunning.com and go check them out there. So that's the one that I'm really excited about is Upward Running.
And for those of you who are 60s aficionados, every time I hear running, all I can think about is Run Around Sue by Dion. That's another topic. Let's get into this whole thing about COVID, Sam. I, it's embedded in my memory. I know it's not been that many years ago, but I think that's going to be one of the things that will stick a long time till death do our part.
Yeah, it was certainly a season that I would rather not have been through myself. we
Right.
were we were shut down for about 13 weeks. I know that there were churches that were shut down for much longer. But Dad, walk us through some of the things that you learned with COVID.
Well, I was in an office where Church Answers was then located in the Franklin, Tennessee area. We still are, but we're not in that office anymore. And I was meeting with Mark Clifton, with whom I used to do a podcast. And I think we were doing some podcasts and we were planning for the future. He gets a call. He said, "Oh, this is a big dog. Let me take it." So he took the call and he came back and said, "This is really weird." He said, "They're telling all of our people to go home immediately. Wherever you are, go home and stay home." That was my first memory of it. I said, "Well, what's going on?" And I'd heard some word about COVID. It's not the first time I'd heard it, but I didn't know it was about to get to that extent. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Especially if you went to a big event recently, get home quickly and try to avoid people." And Mark looked at me. He said, "Last night I was at an NBA game, and I said, 'You were what?' He said, 'I had an NBA game.' So I started moving back from him, and I looked for my Kleenexes to use as a temporary mask. And he said, 'Yeah.' And we didn't even get to the tip off, and they told us all to go home." He said, "The second time." So that was my memory. Now, what was my memory from the church? Well, there's this. Hey, we've got to get to our people, even though we're not here. We've got to connect with them. And that means we've got to understand some new technology. And one of those new technologies kind of combined two of our points was virtual worship services. And that was just not known by most churches then. And to look at see what some of them did back then was really, really innovative on the one hand, creative as well, but also rudimentary too. Some of the things that were put together. A lot of them had to learn technology quickly. And I'll talk about the one that I think has been one of the greatest benefits, which is online giving. But the whole technology thing, Sam, was people were calling us, "What do we use for technology?" People were sending us emails. We had a thread. We had a COVID thread at Church Answer Central, which is an incredible place to be. That's another story in of itself. If you want to get immediate answers from experts and peers, boom. But anyway, we were being inundated, and we were doing our best to keep up, and we're trying to find out what should we say about this projector? What should we say about this camera? What should we say about these different things? And we're scrambling to help churches that had never experienced this experience it. So the technology was the first thing I remember right after it became announced.
Yeah, every church went digital overnight.
Oh, and their attendance went up. A church of
Yeah,
60 became a mega church.
and it all of a sudden, even churches that didn't have a website were live streaming their services.
Right.
And for a lot of churches, I think this was more good than bad. It taught them quickly. That crisis moment taught them that you need to be more available in the digital world. And while I don't like the concept of internet church, that only online, and Ryan Burge has done some good research there to show that
Dispel some myths too.
that's hardly anybody. The people that are watching online are your religious super consumers. They're your best members who are following up on the sermon by rewatching it online.
Right.
That being said, at the time, not now, that's where digital services are now, but at the time, yeah, there were a lot of people tuning in. And I think that there was a lot of good that was done. And so if you were one of those churches that made a pivot and was like, "I don't know what I was doing, but we just live streamed this stuff," I'd say good for you. And I hope you learned a lot through it. So there was technological adaptations. There were these virtual worship services that just seemed to pop up everywhere. But there was also the interactions between the church and government. So walk us through that.
Well, it depended on where you were. Sometimes, let's talk about American churches, United States churches, and where you were depended upon the state and the restrictions that they had, how cautiously they wanted you to be about gathering and not gathering. That in itself would eventually create a lot of consternation. Some said that okay, the churches were treated differently or worse than other places. That's another subject into itself. But you had to know what was going on within your state and sometimes within your county and municipality to know, can we meet in person? If so, what do we do? How many can we have? And then can we meet outside, which some areas gave you permission to do that. And so now you're talking to governmental authorities who have basically taken on the type of posture that we are in emergency and we are going to be in charge for a season. And that's what was going on. It was new to me. Now, you and I lived in states that were not as restrictive. In fact, your state of Florida may have been one of the least restrictive. It's time for y'all to go back to your church.
Welcome to the free land of Florida. Yeah.
And Tennessee was pretty much that way too.
So we did at the very beginning of this thing. Obviously, we wanted to have an idea of what was going on. So, like many churches, we decided to hold off on in-person gathering we did, if I remember right, it's about 13 weeks. But I also think that our county and city government handled things extraordinarily well. Yes, the state of Florida is well known for their response to the pandemic. But, I got very clear communication from our local authorities as to what was expected. And it was very reasonable. And so I was blessed as a pastor because what they were asking us to do as a church was reasonable enough to where it wasn't infringing upon religious liberty, which is a very big thing. As a Baptist, that's a big deal to me, religious liberty. And I think that there were states and were communities where religious liberty was infringed, and I think that there was some government overreach as well. But in our case, because what was being asked was reasonable and our local authorities were working with people to try to figure out what was best, it was very easy for us to say, hey, let's fall in line, guys. What they're asking us to do is not crazy. And the last thing they want to do is infringe upon religious liberty. In fact, there are a few churches that just met anyway. And you know what? The government kind of looked the other way. And sure. Frankly, I think that was the right response. I may show my political cards right there, but I'm very grateful for how things were handled here. I realized that not everyone was in that same boat. And boy, you really struggle. I'm sure there's some pastors listening to this who are like, we had to ask ourselves the question, do we want to fight this? And, right. Are we gonna push back hard? And that's a very difficult place to be.
Here's my perspective. Whatever your relationship was as a church with your local or state government, it became exposed during COVID. If you had a healthy relationship, you saw how healthy it was. If it was an unhealthy relationship, you saw how unhealthy it was. And so if there's a little crack of unhealthy relationship, it became a big crack during COVID, during the pandemic. If you came out of it with a even greater respect for your government, you're moving forward with that same level of respect. And that's what most of Florida saw.
Yeah. So I'll just speak for myself there. I won't speak for anyone else. I think that reason prevailed in my community, which was great. But then this other thing happened. Online giving's been around for forever, but we heard from some key people in this world, like Tidely, who, by the way, has sponsored some of our research and done some things with us before. And they were like, our phones were ringing off the hook. Of course, I don't think it was phones. I think it was probably email and signups from online. But
it was a figurative expression.
So more people went to online giving. And I remember the first couple of weeks of COVID where we get the offering and it would be a quarter of what it should have been. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we are going to get into a cash flow problem. And what's going to happen? And we had all of these contingency plans. And I think my worst case scenario, if I remember right, was a 26-week pandemic.
Wow.
26 weeks. It was like 2 years. These things seem like it went on forever. But thankfully, giving did bump back. And there were so many people calling into the church saying, I want to give, but I don't know how to do this online giving thing. And they had gotten so used to putting a check in the offering plate that they had never signed up for online giving. So it took us, I'd say, a good 30 days to get everyone who wanted to give online signed over to do it. And it was quite an ordeal. Thankfully, it all worked out for us. And then a lot of people who were giving online stayed giving online, which is great. But some of them went back to putting checks in the offering plate or in our boxes. We have giving boxes as well. And I've always told my church, I don't care how you give, just as long as you give. You can put it in a box, you can put it in a plate, you can do it online, or you can send us 30 Bitcoin. Doesn't matter to me. We have a way to deal with it.
I remember the perspective of having two pastor sons for my two churches, my Florida church and my Tennessee church. One of them an old established church. I believe you told me 1954, if I recall correctly, the age of your church. And then your younger brother's church, a young church, where I happen to be recording in his office right now. If some of you have been on the Church Answers podcast and you've seen him with his map behind you, I'm in his office right now. In fact, he just came in a little while ago, see him. And I saw the two different ways that you handle it. You handled it with an old established church that had a rhythm and a way of doing things. They were already at 80% online giving when the pandemic hit, and they're almost 100% right now. At Jess's church, there is no offering time. There is no offering plate. There is a time of acknowledgement of God's gifts and thanking people for what they've given. And there are boxes in the back if anybody happens to want to give anything. In your church, I don't remember the number, Sam, but I remember it's around maybe 10 or 15% online giving, and it started moving up, and it hit 50 at one point. You would know those numbers better than I would.
Yeah, we're actually over 50% now, but we still pass the plate. You know why I like passing the plate?
It's a good symbol.
It is a good symbol, and I don't ever see it going away unless people just totally stop doing it. Because we do it quickly, and it's done in a very smooth sort of way.
Absolutely. Been there many times.
But the reason I like it is because I get to see which deacons are wearing shorts and flip-flops to church. That's why I like it.
And there are a few.
No. So,
and they're not always the youngest ones.
No. Man, we got all. That's one of the great things about Florida. Hey, nobody cares. Wear what you want to wear. You want to wear a suit and tie? Hey, that's great. If you want to wear shorts and a flip-flop, go for it. We've got this beach vibe, and I wouldn't change that for anything.
It's great.
I've seen people come in their trunks before, believe it or not. Now, I wouldn't do that, but I've seen people come in their swim trunks knowing that they're going to go to the beach afterwards. And I'm like, well, at least you're here at church.
Absolutely.
So the other thing that we learned, and boy, I saw this with particularly our older people at West Bradenton, which was hilarious, by the way, because, we did tell people, hey, we don't know what this thing is early on in the pandemic. We don't know what this is. Let's figure this out. Everyone stay in your homes. We'll do online stuff. And there was an older group, a group of older women. This is 80s. They're in their 80s. And they knew they weren't going to get into the church. So they brought all of their lounge chairs to the church parking lot and did their group.
Wow.
Yeah. They're like, you know what? If you're not going to let us in the church, we're still going to be here. And I was like, more power to you. Eventually, we did let them into the church building, of course. But yeah, they were not going to give up on their group. And I think a lot of people through the pandemic realized just how important small groups are. Whatever you call them, Sunday school, life, we call them life groups, small groups. The concept of being in community with a group of people was huge. And people just so desired. They desired worship, yes, but just as much they were desiring their groups.
Yep. They were desiring groups, and we know how important groups are just from a research point of view. I mean, we know that it increases giving, it increases evangelism, it increases ministry. I could go on and on and on. There are different sources of that data research. It's not all ours, but the reality of it is if you don't have a focus on groups, you are misfocused in your leadership and in your church. It's incredibly important, and it will continue to be. The last thing on here, Sam, is intentionality of prayer. That was one of the great things about the pandemic. It made us focus upon some things that really mattered, and prayer was one of those things that mattered. There was a lot of prayer taking place. There was a lot of prayer about the pandemic, but most church members in most churches were cared for through prayer through the pandemic. And West B has a lot of prayer warriors, and that prayer continued to go. From my perspective, it was more visible because most of the time I'm in Tennessee when you're in Florida, and I saw it digitally. But I realized there was a lot going on in your church beyond what I was seeing too.
Yeah, we set up a call center, and while we weren't meeting in person, we got out our database and just called everybody and reached out personally to see if they needed anything. And we did have some people that got sick, of course, and some of them, experienced some pretty traumatic illness through COVID, and we wanted to know who they were and how we could serve them and their families. So it was one of those things where you're like, boy, I really learned a lot, and God certainly let His grace shine through this pandemic, but I don't ever want to do it again. Please, it was exhausting. But yeah, we just called people up, and really ministry. Sometimes we overcomplicate ministry sometimes, and it's like, what do we do? It's a pandemic. What do we do? Literally, just pick up the phone, call everyone, and pray for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that was for a good couple of weeks. I want to say 2 or 3 weeks in the heart of the pandemic. That was our ministry. That was what we did. We're sending emails, we're phone calls. We're just reaching out to people and just talking to them. And there were many of our elderly people, widows, that were just in their homes. They weren't getting out, and they were in their homes for 2, 3, 4 weeks and didn't even go outside hardly. That will get to anybody, even the most extreme of introverts such as yourself. That will get to.
Yeah, I think so. This has been fun is not the word, but I have enjoyed it because there's a reminder that when you're going through some type of tragedy that is of global scale like this, or national or local, like we talk about the hurricane in the future again, things like that, how strong the church is and how strong the church can be. And that's what I love. I just love talking about the local church. I love serving the local church. I love serving pastors and other leaders and lay leaders, and it goes on and on. This was a case where the church came through shining well with very few exceptions. So I'm grateful. Hey, speaking of the church, there is a new ministry called My Church Staff. Love this ministry. Absolutely love this ministry. Basically, it is this. We know that everybody can't have all the staff members that you would like. Would you like a pastor of generosity, a director of generosity to help the people in your church be more generous and give more? Yeah. Well, think about having a pastor or director of generosity in your church where we help you find that person, identify that person, and then we every month provide them resources. We coach them, and they become your generosity pastor. We have those type of positions available in generosity. That is Art Rayner. Music and worship. That is Mike Harlan. And we are introducing the new one in hospitality, guest services, whatever you call it, welcome ministry with Danny Franks. And those are going so well. It's just $100 a month. Counsel at any time. Try it out. See how you like it for your church. Go to our site at Church Answers and go to My Church Staff, or if you happen to have show notes, you can look it up there. Thank you, as always, for being a part of Rayner on Leadership. Hey, just kind of a reminder, we used to do 1 a week. Now we do 2 a week. So here, as we are at January 20th, just a reminder now, 2 a week. Josh King has joined our podcasting staff, and most of the time it's Sam and Josh, and then it's Sam and Tom. There'll be some not mix-ups. We'll mix the people up from time to time, and we'll have some variety there. But 2 Rayner on Leaderships. Thank you always for being a part of this podcast, the other Rayner on Leadership during the week, and Church Answers podcast. We appreciate you more than you know. We'll see you later.